Morning.
It's not annoying anymore.
Yeah.
Now we're judging.
So yeah, you'll be surprised. Hopefully, it'll be good.
Yeah, I would love it. Oh shoot. Yeah. Good. I think you're good to go.
Good morning, everyone. Moshe tells us we are good to go. I hope everyone on Zoom can hear me. I'm behind the plastic, so good morning, everybody. This is Rabbi Kovacs filling in for Rabbi Silber. A real treat to give the daf today. Today's daf is Lamed Gimel. We are picking up at Lamed Base, so we're still in the heart of Pesachim. Lamed Base, Lev. Okay. It's too early to laugh. I got to laugh in the back. All right. Very good. We have Talmud Torah sponsors today are Dovi and Nina Elman in honor of their daughter Ayelet becoming Bat Mitzvah. May she continue to be a source of nachas to the entire family. That'll be great. So again, we're picking up Lamed Base, Amud Base, 32b. We're 13 lines up. And I'll tell you outside, the inyan we're dealing with is paying back if someone ate truma. So don't eat truma, but if someone ate truma, they need to pay back the keren, that's the actual value consumed, plus a chomesh, a 1/5 sort of a penalty, a knas. And we were on this topic because we're talking about what if he ate chametz truma that wouldn't have any value. We were discussing whether you pay back the actual value or the size, the weight of the measure. That was the topic on Amud Aleph. Here we are on Amud Base. We're talking about Rav Papa was discussing Abba Shaul's opinion regarding paying back truma. And according to Rav Papa, Abba Shaul needed two factors. Abba Shaul required the person to eat a kazayis, a olive-size amount of truma, in order to pay back, because it says achila. Achila is usually kazayis, as we know from eating matzah. And he also required a shava pruta. It had to be worth a pruta. So he understands that our sages live in a normal capitalistic society where prices actually fluctuate. So sometimes you'd have a kazayis that could be worth less than a pruta, and sometimes you'd have a pruta and it might be less than a kazayis because prices go up and down according to supply and demand. So we are 13 lines up, and we had just had a tiyuvta on Rav Papa saying that Rav Papa can't hold. Abba Shaul needs both a pruta and a kazayis to pay back eaten truma. He only needs the pruta. So towards the end of that line, 30 lines up, but af Rav Papa haderbei, even Rav Papa retracted, and we're going to prove it here. Titania, there's a brisa vechata bishgaga. The pasuk says vechata bishgaga, and this is a pasuk by Me'ilah. Actually, I have the pasuk here, nefesh ki timol, a soul that did a Me'ilah. It's hard to translate that, but sort of a transgression, a usury, they say. Me'ol, v'chata bishgaga, and he sinned by mistake. Mikod she'Hashem, v'hevi as al-shamayel Hashem, etc. He brings his asham, which has a minimal value, but he sinned by mistake. So it sounds a bit redundant. So he says, prat lemezi. This excludes someone doing me'ilah on purpose, who should not have to bring a carbon. Halo dinu, because you might have said it's a kal v'chomer. You wouldn't need a pasuk. Ma shar mitzvahs. What about other mitzvahs? Shachayev behen karis. Now these are mitzvahs like not eating dam and chaylev. So we cannot eat dam and chaylev, and if somebody did that on purpose, it's a karis. So don't try that at home. Poter, and he's poter from bringing a carbon. So he has chayev karis, so don't eat dam and chaylev, but he's poter from bringing a carbon. If he did it by mistake, he would in fact bring a carbon to be a kapara for eating dam or chaylev. Poter behen, es ha-mezid. So he's poter the mezid. The Torah says the mezid does not bring a carbon for kapara because he gets karis instead. Me'ilah, compare that to me'ilah, she'ein bo karis. It doesn't have a punishment of karis. Eino din she'pater es ha-mezid. So the mezid, a person does it on purpose, should not have to bring a carbon. So why does the pasuk have to tell me, v'chata bishgaga, he sinned by mistake? That's when he brings a carbon. I should know that already, comparing to other isurim in the Torah. Lo imamrat b'shar mitzvah says no. It's not a good comparison if you say by other mitzvahs sheken lo chayev behen misa. It's not chayev the death penalty. Now the mita, the misa we're talking about here is Misa B'dei Shemayim, is death at the hands of heaven, Lo Aleinu, and it is not a court-imposed punishment that the Sanhedrin gives out. It's actually a punishment that would strike a person down at the hands of heaven, and heaven has a lot of agents working for heaven, so don't take it too lightly. So Tomar B'mila Shechayev B'hamisa. So these other sins like Chaylev and Dam, he's Chayev Kares. We're going to get to that in a second, what that means. But he's not Chayev Misa, so he can't compare Me'ila, that's Chayev Misa, so it sounds like that's worse. Talmud Lamar Bishka Ga Prat Lemezid. So the pasuk has to tell us by Me'ila, a shogeg is the one who brings the carbon, brings the asham from Me'ila, and not someone who did it by mistake. V'amr le Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak le Rav Chia Bar Avin Hai Tana Meikara Elima le Kares. So at the beginning he says Kares is alima, is stronger, it's worse, scarier. The Saif Elima le Misa, and at the end he says Misa is worse. Now, our Mefarshim say it's a little vague in Shas, but it seems that Kares is early death, Lo Aleinu, and some sources say it's a loss of children also, God forbid, Lo Aleinu. And Misa apparently is early death, but it's a bit of a later early death. So it's death after the age of 60, whereas Kares would be even before the age of 60. So there is a tzad to say that Kares is earlier death and worse. But there's another tzad, maybe Kares is more mechaper than a Misa B'dei Shemayim is. So it's not really a fair comparison to compare mannerisms of death at the hands of heaven. Amar lehachi kamar. So this is what the Bryce is saying. Lo imarat b'shar mitzvahs. So it's not a good comparison from the other mitzvahs like chaylev and dam. Sheken lo chayev behen misa. He's not chayev misa b'dei shemayim b'pachot mikazayis, for less than a kazayis. So there, if he ate chaylev or dam and it's half a kazayis, he doesn't get kares. Now it's still asur. This is what's called chatzi shir asur min haTorah. So half an amount, even half a kazayis of dam is still asur to eat. It's just we're not going to give you a problem. So if you show up, it's the shear. You understand, shear is amount. But we also say shear. You're at the Daf Yomi shear, Baruch Hashem. So if you get half the Daf Yomi shear, we're not going to kill you. It's still good, but you got to come to the whole shear. That's kind of what the Torah is mashma here. Tomar b'meila, so you can't compare that to meila shechayev b'misa b'bechat mekazayis, because you could be chayev misa for meila for even less than a kazayis. We're going to see a little bit of that. Amarle Tanuch Daitach says, your mind should be at ease. Your mind should have rest. Shehanachta es daita. You've put my mind at rest because your explanation here about Pachat Megazayis being not a good comparison, that puts my mind at rest. Amarle, my nichusa. What's so restful about it? He says, you know what, my shita is not so amazing either. The Rav Sheshes Shad B'Hinarga. Rav and Rav Sheshes already threw an axe into my argument. Man shamat le de amar, we're turning over. Heizi b'mila misa. Who is the only opinion that says that someone purposefully committing me'ila, top line of Lamed Gimel, gets the death penalty, the misa b'dei shemayim? Rebbe, that's only Rebbe. Now we're at the top, but this lashon, I'm just going to point out this lashon of shadu b'narga. He threw an axe into my argument. It's an amazing thing. Like, you threw an axe into my argument. It sounds scary. There's a Gemara and Bracha. This is going back about almost a year. The Gemara in Brachas, in the fourth parak, Daf Chaf Ches, and they say it's an amazing Gemara. There is this machlokes in Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Gamliel about davening Mariv, what we call Mariv. Tfilas Arvis Rishus Chova. You remember it now. And Rabbi Gamliel calls out Rabbi Yehoshua. He says, they told me what you said. I don't agree. Stand up. We're going to testify against you. We're going to get this settled in the yeshiva. We're gonna nail this down. And he says the lashon there is hamted anshavo bale trising. He says, wait until the shield bearers arrive, and then we're gonna settle this whole argument. Now, the shield bearers, the Mefarshim say, that's a higher level. Because here they're throwing an axe into an argument. So anybody can throw an axe at your shita. But to be a shield bearer means you have to think ahead and defend against any attacks. You have to really know your stuff cold to hold the shield and defend against all the axes and the spears and all of that kind of thing. So that's a higher madrega of Talmid Chacham, is the one holding the shield, who can defend himself. Likewise, we have a concept in halacha. We say koach de hetera adif. We say that the lenient opinion is stronger. Now that doesn't mean, let's go out and find all the leniencies. It means it's relatively easy to be machmir. To be machmir, okay, let's be cautious. But to be mekel, you have to be very sure of yourself. You have to really know your sugya cold. So we say koach de hetera adif, and that's the lashon balei trisin, and here they're throwing an axe into the argument. So good. So now we're picking up on Avad Aleph here with Rebbe. Rebbe's the only one who holds that Me'ila is Mita, is Misa B'dei Shemayim. Titania, there's a brisa, hazid b'me'ila. He purposefully did me'ila. He purposefully said, Rashi says, hana kodesh. He had hana from hekdesh. We're going to see that's not so pashit. Rebbe omer b'misa. Rebbe says it's misa b'dei shabayim, chachamim omrim be'azhara. It's a lav, it's a warning. You can't do that. My time, the Rebbe, what's the reasoning of Rebbe? Amar Rebbe abahu, Gamar chet mitruma. So Rebbe learns out from truma. Truma is called a chet, and truma gets a misa b'dei shamayim. If you, God forbid, eat truma, please don't. So he learns that out to me'ila. Ma truma b'misa, just like truma gets misa b'dei shamayim. Af me'ila b'misa. So too me'ila, done on purpose, gets misa b'dei shamayim. Umina, he's domina mina. He says, and what's the shear? Ma truma b'kazayis. Just like truma needs a kazayis. Af me'ila b'kazayis. So too me'ila would need a kazayis to be chayav misa b'dei shamayim. Now, Rashi, that was the first Rashi in Lamed Gimel, says hana hekdesh. He had enjoyment from hekdesh. The Tosfos says it's not any hana of hekdesh, it's eating. Dafka, it's eating, and dafka a kazayas that would get a chiyuv misa, because Tosfos brings by truma itself, other forms of enjoying truma are not chayiv misa. So if somebody used truma for firewood, or someone used the wine of truma to settle the dust on his floor and make his house smell nice by, they had dirt floors. So if you use the wine of truma for that, that wouldn't be chayiv misa. Be eating a kazayas davka would be chayiv misa. So therefore, me'ila bekazayas davka is chayiv misa. So the lashon of the Gemara, af me'ila bekazayas, sounds a lot like Tosfos. Rashi says, ini hanas hekdesh, and this reminds us of 1 week ago, there was a man sitting in the shade of the temple. You remember who that was? Okay, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was sitting in the shade of the temple. That was just 1 week ago, Rabbi. So you got to do chazara. And they said that's an example of a hana that's unavoidable, because he needed that space to give shir to the rabbim, to teach everybody. He needed the space, so he was allowed to sit in that open area outside the temple, even though certain times a day the shade would be on him and he would get this unavoidable, he doesn't really want the hana, but it's unavoidable hana from the temple. Now there's a diuk there, because it says he was sitting there all day. If he's sitting there all day, you understand, Rabbosai, the sun actually moves in the sky, so sometimes he was in the sun and sometimes he was in the shade. So if he's there all day, that demonstrates he wasn't going out of his way to get hana from the building of the temple, because he was there when it was sunny, he was there when it was shady. He just needed the space to be able to give shir to the rabbim. So he was machmir like Rashi, he wasn't getting any hana on purpose. It was unavoidable, was the sugi over there last week. He was getting unavoidable hana from the temple building. But here we're saying, Rebbe says you need a kazayas from me'ila. If he eats a kazayas of the kodshim, he's chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. That's doing it on purpose. Of course, b'shogeg, as we saw, is a asham me'ilas, and he pays back. Must give Rav Papa, and Rav Papa objected to this. Remember, we're trying to prove Rav Papa retracted his opinion of Abba Shol, that you need both kazayas and a sheva pruta. How do you think Rabbi holds like Rabbanan? Maybe he holds like Abba Shol, Amar Yesh Ba Sheva Pruta, Afalgav, Delay Spek Kazayas, who holds you only need a Sheva Pruta to be Chayiv Me'ila, even though you didn't eat a Kazayas. Ha Rav Papa, who da Amar da Abba Shol Tarte Bai, but Rav Papa, didn't you say that Abba Shol requires both a Kazayas and a Sheva Pruta? So it seems that Rav Papa retracted and he said that Abba Shol only needs the Sheva Pruta, he doesn't need a Kazayas to pay back Me'ila or Truma. Now you're going to ask me, if he only ate a Sheva Pruta of Me'ila or Truma, how is he going to pay back? Because we know, archaeologists will tell you, that there was a Pruta coin and there was a half a Pruta coin, but there was no 1/5 of a Pruta coin. And paying back is a Chomesh, and Chomesh is a fifth. So he should be paying back a fifth. You would need a fourth of a Pruta coin. So you have to ask the archaeologists if they ever found this. I know they found half Prutas from the temple era, and they found full Prutas. They found bigger coins. They found 8 pruta coins, things like this. But a fourth of a pruta or a fifth of a pruta, I don't know if they have that lemaisa. So maybe he would pay back in kind with some sort of produce or something. So that's something that's a shaila for the archaeologists and the researchers. So I'm sure someone will look that up. Marbre de Ravana. Moving on. So Marbre de Ravana Amar Hachika Marla. Hachika Mar Lo Imamret Bashar Mitzvah. So he's giving another comparison. By me'ila needing to be by mistake to bring a carbon, and on purpose we said is misa b'dei shamayim. So it's not like you say by other mitzvahs shelo asa behen she'ein miskaven kemiskaven, that we don't make an unintentional act like an intentional act by other mitzvahs. Here's their example: she'im niskaven lachtoy chetzatolush, because if he intended to cut something that was already tolush, detached from the ground, v'chotach is a mechuber, and instead he cut something attached to the ground, shepater, he's pater. Now this is going back to Shabbos. So Baruch Hashem, we just had a review on brachas. Now we're going to review on Shabbos. Shabbos, Rashi tells us, is maleches machshavas binan, to be chayiv on Shabbos, either chayiv skila, if there's edim, God forbid, or chayiv karis, or chayiv to bring a korban, if it's b'shogig. He has to be doing something knowingly, with some sort of intention. He has to intend to cut this leaf that's attached to the ground. And okay, it was a mistake. He didn't know it was Shabbos. He didn't know it was Aser. But he has to actually, the act itself has to be with kavana, with intention. If he's intending to cut leaf A, which is not attached to the ground, and he ends up not looking what he's doing and cutting leaf B, which is attached to the ground, he's pater. So meleches mechsheves asur Torah by Shabbos. So can we compare Shabbos? Because it would be pater, tomer b'meila, shim niskaven lechis chamim. There's a similar case by meila. If he wants to warm himself up, begizei chulin, with shearings. So he sheared his sheep, and he has a bag full of shearings. He's going to use them for a pillow or a blanket or a mattress to warm up. And instead, v'nischamim begizei ola, and instead he used the shearings of an ola. And obviously the shearings of an ola, the entire ola goes up on the mizbeach, so the shearings too belong to the temple. Shemal, that would be meila if he warms up with the shearings of the sheep of the Ola. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Hachi Kamar. This is what we're saying in comparison is Lo imamra b'shar mitzvahs. It's not like the other commandments. Shkan lo mischayev behen she'ein mitasek mitasek. Now mitasek is another level we discussed by Shabbos. We spent most of the year learning Shabbos, Rav say. So it's good to review it. Mitasek means he's involved in something else. He's not really paying attention to the act he's doing because his mind is on something else. And mitasek means he's busy. He's preoccupied with something else. She'im niskaven l'hagbia tetolish. His intention is to pick up, say, a flower that's already detached from the ground. He cut a flower before Shabbos, left it on the ground. It was designated, so it wasn't muksa, it was designated for Shabbos. And he accidentally pulled up a mechuber flower because he was looking at the tolish flower and he was mitasek. He was trying to pick that up, but he heard a dog bark and his eyes were somewhere else, and he accidentally grabbed the one that was mechubar. Shepater. So that's pater because again, by Shabbos, maleches machsheves asur Torah, he needs an intentional act, and he has to be intending to do this act, not intending to do something else, and he accidentally got distracted and ended up plucking the flower that was attached to the ground. That's still pater because he wasn't intending that. Rabbi said. Tomer b'meila, can you say the same thing about meila? Shim choshit yado lekli. He puts his hand into the kli, litol chayfetz. He dropped his keys or his fork into a bowl, and he sticks his hand into the bowl. What happens? V'sach yado b'shemen shel kodesh. And his hand gets meila anointed. He's going for his keys, but they're in a bowl of hekdesh oil, and now his hand is anointed. Shemal. He's committed meila, even though he's mitasek. Even though he has no intention to get oil on his hands, he just wants to grab his keys. So Nebuch, he's committed meila. So it's a different standard of kavana by meila. Amar Mar b'medvar memorim. So now actually going back, we're taking a backtrack to yesterday. We were talking about, do we pay back truma lefi mida or lefi damim? Is it according to the amount or according to the value? So we're going back to there. Mafrish truma v'chmitza. So we're talking about if it was chametz, it's worthless on Pesach. Chametz on Pesach is worthless. So if he ate truma that's chametz on Pesach, really it has no value of objective monetary value because it's also v'hana. So, when does this apply? B'mafrish truma v'chamitza. He separated truma and it became chametz later. Of all hefresh chametz truma, he had chametz on Pesach and he tried to make that his truma. Divrei kol eina kedosha. It does not become kadosh. It does not become truma. It's not a valid designation because it's chametz. How do we know these words? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Amar Kra. The pasuk says, Titain lo. You have to give him. You give to the Kohen the truma. It says, Reshit degoncha tiroshcha v'tzarecha Reshit gez tzonecha Titain lo. Give it to the Kohen. Lo v'lola oro, not to his fire. If you gave him chametz on Pesach, he has no choice but to burn it. And he can't even have hana from the burning. We remember a review from a couple weeks ago, you fired up an oven with chametz on Pesach, it's aser, the bread's aser, the oven's aser, according to the one opinion. So you're not giving it for his fire, for the Kohen just to burn it up without hana. You have to give it to him. The pasuk says you have to give him a truma, so truma he can use. Masiv Rav Chaim the Berei Rav Yeshua. So Vikasha ein tormin min ha tameya litzahara. You can't take truma from something that's tamei, that's ritually impure, onto what's tahor. Im tarum b'shogeg. But if he did this by mistake, he didn't know it was impure at the time. Truma so truma. It is valid after the fact. Amai. So why should it be? Just like chametz is not kaddish, lema lo v'lo ora. We could say the same drasha. The pasuk says you have to give the Kohen something he can use, not something he just has to burn. If you give him tamei, he just has to burn it. Lo kasha. It's not a kasha. Chasam chaysa lo shata kusher. It had a time of being kosher, of being valid. So before it got tameh, this produce would have been perfectly good truma lechatchila. Now it's tameh nebuch, but it's okay because it had a time it was kosher. Hacha lo hayta lo shata kusher. But over here by the chametz, it was never kosher. What do you mean? This was never kosher? It was always chametz? It was born chametz? It's very strange. So we're saying it was chametz when it was still mechuber. Because we know the chiyuv of truma, you have to take truma once you've harvested the grain. Once you've harvested the grain, and not before, when it's still attached to the ground, you don't have to take any truma. And here it became chametz when it was already attached to when it was still attached to the ground before it was harvested. If it became chametz after it was harvested, achinami the kocha, it would become a valid truma. So Rabbi say this is an amazing treat. It's mamish a treat. So we're going to pull out the Shulchan Aruch and we're going to see something truly amazing. You're going to love this. We're actually preparing for Pesach right now. I know it's not 30 days before, but anyway, the Shulchan Aruch, he says in Orach Chaim Tafnun Gimel in Dalid. Hachitim, the wheat, she'osin behem matzat mitzvah, that you make the mitzvah matzahs with, that's for the Pesach Seder. Tov l'shamran, it's good to guard them. Shelo yiplu alei mayim, that mayim will not come onto the wheat. Mishat ketzira, from the time of harvesting. Rabbi say this is called shmura matzah. So shmura matzah, the lashon is tov, it's very good to have shmura matzah for the Seder. Lefachot mishat tachina. And b'diavad, if it's from the time of grinding, once you start grinding the wheat, it's much more susceptible to becoming chametz. If it has contact with water for 18 minutes, it could become chametz. So at least from the time of grinding, but it's very tov, it's very good to have shmura matzah for your seder. And b'diavad, you could buy kemach from the shuk to make your matzah mitzvah, because we assume they're not soaking the kemach, the flour. So there's amazing Mishnah Brura. You're going to love this Mishnah Brura. It says, Mishat Ketzira, Rotze Lomar, Sheyishmor Me'et Achi, V'lehola, Shelo Yipol Alehem Mayim, L'Shem Matzah Mitzvah. Like we said, it's Shmor Matzah. V'kodem Ketzira, but before cutting it, before harvesting, Shedayin Hay Mechor Abarin Ein Lochush. You don't have to worry about it when it's still attached. Afilu, Sheyadina and Sheyadalem Geshamim. Even if you know it rained on the wheat, it's not a problem. V'ayin L'Kaman, Siman Tasaz, right? Afilu Mechubar, there is an opinion, Afilu Mechubar, Im nit yabsha legamre, if the wheat had fully dried out, ein sarach od lekarka, so it does not have to be on the ground anymore. It's not taking more water out of the ground. It's already fully ripened and dried out. Mekabel chimutz, it can become chametz im yardoleim geshamim if it rains on this. Al ken the minag liktzor dagan shel shmura. Therefore, when we make shmura matzah, we harvest the dagan, the crops be'odan lachin ktsas, before it's dried, when it's still a little bit wet. We harvest it then. And this is brought from the Chaya Adam. The Mishnah Berurah is bringing the Chaya Adam, and the Chaya Adam brings this from the Gra. And he says the Gra was machmir for his shmura matzah, that it was like this. It was not dried out, because the chashash is if it's dried out all the way and it's not taking more water from the ground, then when rain gets on it, mamash, a mabul, like mamash, a lot of rain on it, and it's soaking there for 18 minutes on this dried out grain, there's a chashash that could become a chimetz. So this is a real chumrah that the Gra and apparently the Chaya Adam were machmir for, and that the Mishnah Berurah brings. And it would be very interesting if any of the big kashrus companies got into this chumrah and said, "Oh, it's extra shmura, it's shmura min a shmura." But we also have a concept that Torah chasal moment Yisrael, that the Torah doesn't want us to go crazy and doesn't want us to waste our money. So it's a chumrah. If you follow the Gra, then maybe you should look into it. But for the rest of us, shmura matzah is quite adequate. Tov, it's very good to have a shmura matzah, but that's even shmura when it's bechuber. Even if it's attached to the ground, if it's all dried out, there is this chashash of chimetz, and that is our Gemara right here, is the source for that Gra Chaya Adam Mishnah Berurah. So good. So now we're ready for shmura matzah. We're ready for Pesach already. Baruch Hashem. Amrlei ein begezeres irin. So he says Amrlei in begezeres irin pitgoma. He says, I heard this in the gezeres irin, in the saying of the angels. They're saying b'mamar kedishin and sheilti. Now this is a pasuk in Daniel. So he's saying this pasuk is sort of like, yes, this is the right. This is the correct interpretation, that it could become chametz when it is mechubar lakarka if it's dried out. V'ken morin b'vei midrash kivasi. And so in the base medrash, they say like me. So the angels are saying this. Now Rashi actually points out these angels that we're talking about. He says, Irin, Malachim, they're angels, third line up in Rashi, Kolomar, Talmidei Chachamim. These Talmidei Chachamim are angels, Shem Kemalachei Ashares. They're like Malachei Ashares. So these, he's not really saying angels, Mamish, said the halachas like me. He's saying the Talmidei Chachamim that are like angels, said the halachas like me, that grain all the way dried out could become chametz, even attached to the ground, and that's the grain we're dealing with that could never become a valid truma because it never had a shat hakusher. It was never kosher. Ki also Rav Huna Brei Rishua, when Rav Huna came, turning over to Amud Beis, Amar Kra, he says, the pasuk says, he has another source, Reshit, it says, Reshit Titan Lo, you give him the first. Sheshiarei and Nikarin, so if it's a Reshit, that means the leftovers are Nikar, the Yisrael, that they're usable for the Yisrael. So something being first applies there are leftovers. There's other things that are not first that you can use for the Yisrael. If you have to give the Kohen the first, it implies the Yisrael gets the rest. Yatzta Zo, that excludes this chametz during Pesach, She'ein Shirai Nikarin, that if you gave the chametz, if you had a whole pile of chametz grain, it rained on it, something like this, and you gave the truma from that to the Kohen, the rest of it is not appropriate for Yisrael, so it's not Shiraya Nikarin. So that's the source that truma from chametz can't be a real truma. Yosef Rav Achar Rav Avya Kamei de Rav Chista Yosef Kamar Mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan Anavim. This is amazing. So you're going to say Anavim shenitmeu, grapes that got tamei durchan, you should trample on them pachot mikabetza, in a smaller than a betza at a time. So what's going on? He's trying to get tahor grape juice out of tamei grapes. Now this is an amazing sugya, and it's truly amazing. But what's going on is a kibetza of food can transfer tuma. Now kazayit of food can accept tuma from the outside, but you need two kazayit, which is kibetza, to transmit that tuma onward to something else. So if you have less than a kibetza of grapes and you're squeezing them, there's only less than a kibetza there, they can't transmit their tuma to the grape juice coming out. We'll see how that works. The yenan and the wine coming out of this is kosher l'nesachim, can go on the mizbeach to accompany the karbanos. This is amazing. It's mamish kosher v'osher. It's not tamei at all. Alma Kisavar, we see from this, he has to hold mashkin mifkod pekide, that the juice inside the grape, it's like it's deposited there. It's not really the ikr part of the fruit. It's like a deposit inside the grape. Le'emus, so when, le'emus kot metame, when does it become tame? L'chi sachit, when he does sachita, when he squeezes it out. Sachit l'chu. And once he squeezes it out, there isn't a shear of kibetza in those grapes when he squeezes the grape juice out, so it can't be metame from the grapes to the grape juice. If that's so, kibetza nami. If you had exactly a kibetza in size, it would also be tahor. De hatznon, and there's a mishnah like this. Tame may, someone was tame from contact of a dead body. Shesachat zaitim anavim. He squeezed out his olives or grapes. Kibetza michavenis. He had exactly a kibetza in size. Tahurin. They are tahor. How does that work? Is because once he starts squeezing it, it's less than a kibetza. He started with a kibetza of grapes, but once you've squeezed out the first drop, you have a kibetza minus a drop. So it can't transmit the tuma from the grapes to the grape juice. Chasam diavid. That's only b'diavad. We don't want people who are tamei meis going out and weighing out a kibetza of grapes and olives and start to squeeze them, because just a tiny fraction more than that kibetza, and a kibetza, depending on the size of your grapes, it could be 3, 4, 5 grapes. It's not very much. A tiny bit more, your grapes are a little bigger, then everything will be tamei, and he's going to mess the whole thing up, and he can't use it for nesachim anymore. So that's b'diavad. We'd say that. Hacha lechatchila. Over here we say lechatchila. Your grapes got tamei. He's not tamei meis, but he wants less than a kibetza. Less than a kibetza, he has a little wiggle room. Gezerah dilma aseh lemevad yoser mikabetza. So we say it's a gezerah. Maybe we don't want him to do more than a kibetza. If you do exactly a kibetza, he'll come to do a little bit more, and he's going to have a tuma problem. Amar Rav Chista, man tzayis Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi. He says, who's going to listen to you and Rabbi Yochanan your Rebbe? You're telling me you can take tamei grapes a little at a time and squeeze them out, and then use that wine on the mizbeach because it's perfectly tahor. Like, who's going to listen to this? The tuma in the grapes, where'd it go? No, where's the tuma? You're squeezing tamei and you're telling me it's tahor? Alma kasaver mashkin mivla b'liyeh. He must hold the mashkin is absorbed in the fruit. So the first lashon was mifkad bekide. It was like deposited inside. It was separate. And here it's mivla b'liyeh. It's like absorbed in the fruit. So in the fruit itself is the mashka. The juice itself is part of the fruit. Kevan de tamulei uchla. So, and since it became tamei when it was a uchla, a food, a solid food, it's malamoshke. So the juice inside, which is part of the solid food, also becomes tamei. So it's very different ways of looking at the fruit. If it's, if the insides are really just a deposit there, or if they're really an ikr part. And as a chassidish of art, this is our neshama and our goof. Our neshama and our goof, we Elokai neshama shenatatabi. It's natatabi. Our neshama is not an ikr part of our goof. Our neshama is placed from Hashem into our goof. So our neshama goes by the first manda amar, mipkad pkide. So when, God forbid, your goof is squeezed, what cries out to Hashem? The neshama tahara. The goof might be tamei, but the neshama, which is a place there from Hashem from the outside, is still always tahor, as long as you're pachot mikabetza. So I don't know how that works in the Chassidus, but I'm sure there's Chassidim who explain that also. Amar lei, the atlo tispera de mashkin mipkab kidi says, you don't hold that the mashkin, the juices, are merely deposited inside the grape; they're not an ikr part. Hatznan, there's a mishnah, tame meis shesachat zaitim anavim, like we said, nichavenis kibetza, and they're exactly a kibetza and not more. Taharin, that becomes tahor when he squeezes it out, because we say the first drop, now it's less than a kibetza. So it's good if you hold the juice inside is merely a deposit there and not truly part of the fruit. That's why the juice is tahor when it's squeezed out, because now there's no more kibetza anymore to transmit tuma to the juice. If you say the juice is truly absorbed inside the grapes and is part of the grapes, amai tahor, and why should it be tahor in this mishnah? He says back, what are you dealing with here? These anavim were not kosher. Now, you understand the grapes are kosher. We huchshru lekabel tuma, because we know that food needs to get wet to be mekabel tuma. There are 7 liquids that can make foods ready to become tuma. They are yad, shachat, dam, yayin, dvash, shemen, cholav, tal, dam, and mayim. If any of those 7 liquids fall on your food, and that's good for your food, then you wash off your grapes, whatever it is, you wash off your apples, then they are ready to be mekabel tuma. So these grapes never got wet. Obviously, it rained on them, but once you cut them, they never got wet. They were never mukhshar lekabel tuma. So la'emus mikshrei, when were they made kosher? L'ki sachit l'chu, once he squeezes them, now the grape juice coming out, grape juice is in the klal of yayin, can make them ready to be kabel tuma. So you have tame grapes, but they're not ready to be mekabel tuma and transfer tuma until you get them wet. When does he get them wet? When he starts to squeeze them. When does he start to squeeze them? Now it's less than a kibetza, Rabbosai. So it's beautiful. So you have an out here, because these grapes were never ready, were never mukhshar lekabel tuma. Ki sachi l'chu b'tzir l'hu shiur. Now he's reduced the shear of kibetza. Without the kibetza, they're not going to transmit tuma onto the juice. So ironically, the juice dripping out as you squeeze the grapes is making the grapes able to accept and transmit tuma. But the fact that you're squeezing the juice out, now you have less than a kibetza, Rabbosai, of these grapes, and it can't transmit tuma to the juice, which is making it able to accept and transmit tuma. It sounds like a physics shaila, about like the black holes and things like this, but it's right here in the Gemara about transmitting tuma. So once you start to squeeze it, you have less than the shear of kibetza, because it was exactly a kibetza. Remember, that's what we said. We don't want the tamei met to squeeze exactly kibetza. We want him to go less, because he might go a little bit more. So it's beautiful. He does exactly kibetza, because once you start squeezing it, you have less juice, and you're not going to transmit the tuma. Dilote mahachi. If you don't tell me, it works out like this. Detanya, there's a brisa halamaha zedome. What does this case resemble? L'trumat tutim zaitim v'navim. It's like a truma of berries and olives and grapes. Shenitma, that it became tamei. She'ein lo ba lo heter chilev lo heter hasoka. So what's going on is usually truma that became tamei, you would burn it. So if you're a truma sandwich, if you're a kohen and your truma sandwich, the bread would be from truma, became tamei, you would throw it in the fire and you'd be able to burn it, you'd be able to get hana from the bread. But here it's a liquid. So it's a liquid from olives or grapes or berries or some kind of fruit, and it became tamei, so you can't really burn a liquid. There's actually, if you remember way back, when we were learning about zvachim, there's a shaila about pouring the wine onto the fire on the mizbeach. You can't do kibui, putting out, extinguishing on the fire on the mizbeach. So there's a shaila, if they're pouring wine onto the mizbeach, you don't want to hit the fire, and the Mepharshim say, well, just a little bit at a time, it's not going to extinguish it, it might throw sparks or something. So there's a little bit at a time. isn't going to affect the fire. But here you can't really burn it because it's a liquid, but it's tamei, so you're supposed to burn it. It's truma tmeya. It doesn't have heter hasaka, v'lo heter achila. Ha heter achila nami ispe. So hold on a sec. She'emba lo heter achila v'lo heter hasaka. So you can't eat it because it's truma tmeya, and you can't burn it because it's a liquid. Ha heter achila nami ispe. So you say there is a heter achila here to e baye darachlu pahot mikabetza, because we're assuming it hasn't been squeezed yet, his grapes or his olives or his berries. So you could squeeze it less than a kabetza. So it would be an out. We would say this truma tmeya. We'd say just don't make it tmeya in the first place. You only squeeze less than a kabetza at a time. Amarava. So we say really that should work, but there's a gezeira. Gezeira dilma ase behulide takola. If we let him keep around tame grapes and olives and berries, so he's going to come to actually eat them instead of just squeezing out the juice of less than a kabetza at a time, which would make the juice tahar. Are we really worried about causing a takola? Takola is maybe he's gonna eat it, and that'd be an avera of truma tmeya. Hatanya, there's a brisa madlikin bepasiv shemen shel truma shenitmes. If the Kohen has oil or bread of truma and it became tamei, he could use it to light his fire. Amrle pot zarik le ben eitzim. So how do you avoid the takola? The bread, you're throwing it among the firewood. So it's not in his bread box. It's not in his fridge. He's throwing this tamei bread into the firewood pile. Shemen shel truma rami le bekli mais. And the shemen shel truma, that now it's tamei, you can't keep it in your regular kelim. You put it in a disgusting kli. You remember we had about a week ago by the wine that got tamei. We said, the wine that got tamei, you could use it for ziluf. You use it to keep the dust down on your floor. They said, so good, but you might come to the takola. That's why it's not mentioned here, because it would be a takola. To keep tamei truma wine around, because the Kohen will come to drink it, because he drinks wine with lunch. It's meshach. So it says, so you put it in a kli mais, same eitzah. Put it in a disgusting kli, a dirty kli. Say, no, you want to keep this around for ziluf. You want it to smell good. You don't want it to be disgusting. So he wouldn't do that. So he's going to keep it in his good kli. So that's why wine would be a takola. But we see by the bread and oil, you can put them somewhere gross, where you're not going to come to eat it. Be able to keep it around. I have a little more time. Gufa, madlikin bepas v'shemen shel truma shenimei. So the Kohen can light up with bread or oil of truma that became truma tmeya. Abaye amar mishmei de Chizkiah. Abaye said in the name of Chizkiah, Rav amar devei Rabbi Yitzchak bar Marta amar Rav Huna lo shano ele pas. This is only by bread itself. Avalchitin, but kernels of grain. Kernels haven't been ground up yet. Lo. You can't keep those around because you're going to come to takola. So bread, you're not going to come to takola because you're going to throw it in the firewood pile. But grains of wheat, you can't keep around because the Kohen might come to eat them when they are tamei, truma tameya. Shema yavu behanli day takola. We've been saying maybe he's going to have a takola. He's going to come to eat these kernels of grain. Rabbi Yochanan amar afilu chite. He could even keep around kernels of grain that are tameya, that are truma tameya. Amai. So amai nechash. What are you so worried about? Dilma ate behanli day takola. Maybe he's going to come to takola. He's going to make popcorn or going to eat the grains as they are. Kamar Rav Ashi. So there's a solution like Rav Ashi. Wow, top of Lamadal. Bishlikasa umeista. He overcooked it. Shlika is the mamash cooked it into some soft porridge. Meista, and he put it somewhere gross. Hachanami bishlikasa umeista. So then he put it somewhere gross where he's not going to come to eat it. So if he already made the grains soft, so they're going to get a hard grain. You understand? Even a hard grain falls on the floor. A kernel of popcorn falls on the floor. You can pick it up and you go ahead and pop it. Same thing with the grains. So here he already cooked it, shlika, and he made it gross. So beautiful. Since I have a couple minutes, I'm going to tell you. We started with a comparison of me'ila and truma and a comparison of death penalties. And there's amazing Tosfos on Lamed Beis, the last Tosfos there. We're not going to read the whole thing, but I'll tell you outside. He says, how is this a comparison? You're comparing death penalties? Tema, Neima Hina Hanusenis, the Shar mitzvahs, Shehen Chamuris. These other mitzvahs are very Chamar, Shehen Bekaris. This was, remember, Dam and Chaylev. The punishment was Karis, not Misa B'dei Shemayim. Ein Liz Dona Kapara. Maybe for a Zodon, maybe he did it on purpose, there's no Kapara at all. So by a mistake, he ate Dam or Chaylev by mistake, he brings a carbon chatas. And on purpose, it's a karis. So we say maybe there should be no kapar if he did it on purpose. Aval me'ila sheikola she'en bakaris, but me'ila is mekel. There's no karis. Yesh lezona kapara. If you did me'ila on a purpose, maybe there should be a kapara with a carbon. So we know it's only by mistake. He brings it. Ki agavna ika b'reish makos. He brings talking about the edim zomamim, the first parak of makos. kasher zaman, kasher asod. He says they didn't actually do anything, but they accused another person of doing something. They would be punished with the same thing, kasher zamam, the edim zamamim, and it's an amazing thing that maybe there's something that's so bad, a sin so bad that the carbon is not going to work. And we actually see this. It's an amazing nekuda by Molech. Molech of all things, it says in the pasuk, he gave some of his children to the Molech. He gave some of his children to the Molech. He's chayiv avodah zara, he's chayiv misa. We're going to kill the guy. We're going to kill him out for doing that. Some of his children. What if he gave all his children to Molech? So there's mafarshim there who say, gadol avono minsai. It's impossible to have a kapara. So if he did Molech, he gave his children over to Molech, some of them. So the Bezdin will kill him, and Baruch Hashem, he gets a kapara, and he goes to Gehenna, Baruch Hashem, and eventually Baruch Hashem, Yesh Kol Yisrael Chelek Olam Haba. But what if he gave all his children to Molech? So some of the Marshim say that's not included in the punishment of Molech. If he did that, it's impossible to get a kapara. So it's a really interesting taisvus comparing the Me'ilah to the Chaylev and Dam, to the Karas versus Mizbeh Dei Shemaim. But it's also, there could be such a thing that's too much for a carbon to deal with it. So Baruch Hashem, Rabbi Zay covered a lot of ground. And have a wonderful day. Shkoyach.